Hello, it's Sam Elbick here from samconsulting.com. In this video, I'll be giving you an introduction to E-Rate, the federal program that provides subsidy for broadband connections to schools and libraries. Now, I'll assume that you have no knowledge of the E-Rate program, and I will try to keep this quick and high level. E-Rate is the commonly used term for a federal program that provides subsidy for broadband connections to schools and libraries, and for the broadband connections within a school or library. In this video, I'll refer to school or library interchangeably, so in this video when I refer to school, you can substitute library instead. E-Rate is a commonly used term for the federal program. The official name is the Schools and Libraries Fund. However, throughout this video, I'll just refer to this program by its commonly used name, E-Rate. The E-Rate program rules are set by the Federal Communications Commission, otherwise known as the FCC, and the rules are implemented by a non-profit organization called the Universal Service Administrative Company, otherwise known as USAC. The Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, is an independent federal agency responsible for setting and regulating rules regarding telecommunications. In the section below this YouTube video, I'll have links to the FCC and to the E-Rate program in USAC. So as I've mentioned, E-Rate is a federal program to provide subsidy for the schools or libraries broadband connection, as well as the equipment required within a school or library to support broadband. So an example of a broadband connection to a school or library is a 100 megabit per second connection. An example of the equipment required within a school or library are access points, routers, switches, and also the cabling required. The subsidy level is dependent on the poverty level of the school's students, and also whether the school is in an urban or rural area. So the higher the poverty level of the school students, the higher the subsidy. And if the school is in a rural area versus an urban area, the higher the subsidy. The minimum subsidy level, irrespective of the poverty level of the students, is 20%. And the poverty level can be determined by a number of factors, but the most common is student participation in the National School Lunch Program. Now, it should be noted that the percentage of students on the National School Lunch Program does not equate to the subsidy percentage. In other words, there's a mapping performed. For example, if 30% of the school students are enrolled in the National School Lunch Program, then the subsidy level provided by the E-Rate program is 50%. So here's an example of the E-Rate subsidy. Assume that the school's subsidy level is 70%, and it's often referred to as the discount level of the school. So let's say it's 70%. If the cost of a 100 megabit per second broadband connection to the school is $1,000, and let's say the cost of the routers, switches, and access points within the school is $10,000, then with a 70% subsidy level, the E-Rate program would subsidize the cost of the broadband connection, which is $1,000 per month. The E-Rate program would subsidize $700. And the equipment cost, the E-Rate program would subsidize $7,000. So the out-of-pocket cost for the school is $300 per month for the 100 megabit per second broadband connection, and $3,000 for the equipment, the routers, switches, wireless access points. So how do you actually get this subsidy? Well, there's a process to follow in the E-Rate program that has strict deadlines and rules. And I'll now give you a high-level overview of this process. But before I do, I need to highlight two key terms: the applicant and the service provider. An applicant is a school or school district or library system, and a service provider is the vendor that sells the broadband connection or provides the equipment for the broadband within a school or library, like the routers and switches and access points. The applicant and service provider are two separate distinct entities within the E-Rate program, and E-Rate has specific rules applicable to either the applicant or the service provider. Now, throughout the rest of this video, the process that I will be talking about is from the perspective of the applicant. Throughout the remaining of this video, I'll just be using the terms applicant, school or library interchangeably. The very first thing you do is to obtain a Build Entity Number, or BEN, from the USAC website, and I'll give the link below to obtain the BEN. The next step is to let service providers know what you need, so that a service provider can provide you pricing and other necessary details regarding your required service and/or equipment. You do this by completing a specific form called E-Rate Form 470. The Form 470 you would then post to the USAC website. And now this form will then be available for service providers to view and then respond to you with pricing and other necessary details. The Form 470 is now publicly available on the USAC website and allows service providers to respond to your request in the Form 470. An example of what you might include in an E-Rate Form 470 is, for example, 1 gigabit per second of internet to the school site, and within the school you might request 4 switches and 20 wireless access points. That would be an example of the type of service and equipment that you could request on a Form 470. You then need to keep your Form 470 or bid open for at least 28 days to allow service providers to respond. In other words, you cannot select a service provider prior to the conclusion of the 28 days. It's very important to remember this, that you keep your bid open for at least 28 days. If you don't, and for example you select a service provider prior to the 28-day period, then this is a reason why your funding request will be denied. And this is one of the rules that have to be respected within the E-Rate program. Otherwise, your funding request will be denied. After the Form 470 posting, you wait at least 28 days, and then you can see which service providers have responded. For the service providers that have responded, you can perform a bid evaluation, which is assigning points to bidder responses based on your pre-established criteria. The service provider that achieves the most points, you would award the business to. Now note that for the bid evaluation, price has to be the highest weighted factor, but not necessarily above 50%. It just has to be the highest weighted factor when compared to the other factors in the bid evaluation. So for example, you could have pricing weighted at 40%, and then 3 more factors weighted at 20% each. For example, quality of service at 20%, support at 20%, and experience at 20%. So that would comply with the E-Rate rules. If you had pricing at a factor of 10%, let's say, and quality of service at 20%, then that is against the E-Rate rules, and that will be another cause for funding denial. So it's very important in your bid evaluation matrix that you ensure that the pricing component of your bid evaluation is the highest weighted factor amongst all your factors in the bid evaluation. So after you have selected a service provider, you inform USAC of this by filing what's called a funding request form, which is a Form 471. And this is a form where you inform USAC of the price of the service that you're purchasing or the price of the equipment you're purchasing. And then based on your percentage subsidy level, let's say 70%, you request the subsidy from USAC. So once the funding request has been submitted, which is a Form 471, people at USAC will review the form and check it for errors. For any minor errors, USAC will call you and have the Form 471 updated. For example, small typos. If there are major errors on the form, for example, if in the Form 471 there's a service that you're requesting funding for that was not on the original Form 470, then USAC will deny the funding request. So again, it's very important when you're submitting a Form 471 and very important throughout the E-rate process, that you respect the rules, you follow the rules, and respect the deadlines. Once USAC have reviewed the Form 471 and everything is as it should be, they will then send a letter approving the funding request. And this is when you can now submit a request for the subsidy. Now, to receive the subsidy, you would invoice USAC once the service has been provided. And you can invoice USAC on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, or another time period of your choosing. There is flexibility in the time period that you invoice USAC. The process I've just described occurs each year, with the E-rate funding year being from July the 1st to June the 30th of the following year. So, for example, a funding request or Form 471 that you submit between, let's say, January to March of 2020 will apply for the service that you receive between July the 1st, 2020 and June the 30th, 2021. This now concludes my high-level introduction to the E-rate program. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the section below this video. Until the next time, bye.